Humble Faith followers, thank you all so much for tuning in to our show today. This is Sean Kelley, as you know, the host of Humble Faith, where normal people can share their concerns, doubts, fears, and questions about faith. And I love to have amazing faith-based experts on our show. That way we can discuss the real concerns and doubts that people out there in the world have about faith, and we can get some really amazing answers. And ultimately, if we can help lead some of you doubters closer to God and to Jesus, then I feel like I've done my part. And ultimately, when I interview amazing people like our guest we have today, who I'm about to introduce you to, I get amazing questions answered too, and my faith grows even stronger. So I truly feel like this is, for myself, is the ultimate blessing that I get to be a part of interviews like this, and to get to hang out with people like Mary Kloska. Mary is a 5-time published book author. Mary, it's 5?
Eight. I think it's 8.
Okay. Wow.
I think I'm.
My bad. 3 books short. Mary,
that's okay.
Mary, welcome.
I think my last one was number 8. I'd have to go back and count.
Mary, welcome to the show. Please tell us all about your faith-based background and your journey, and tell us how you ended up where you're at today.
Thank you. Well, I was born in a 100% Polish family in Elkhart, Indiana. So my parents are from Grand Rapids, Michigan, and they were kind of funny. They were raised that you, of course, married a Polish Catholic, but also the West Side Catholics weren't supposed to marry the East Side Catholics, and they kind of broke that. So they're kind of rebels. But we ended up here in South Bend and then here in Elkhart when I was born, just from my dad's work. And I'm the 9th of 13 children. Wow. My parents had 12 children, and then we took in foster babies between the time they were born and adopted. And Johnny got caught up in the system. And 3 years later, we adopted Johnny. So, a big Polish Catholic family. We were raised saying the rosary every night. It was not a question. And, I remember being younger and my sisters having dates, and my dad said the date can come pray the rosary or they can wait in the car. But it was not like questionable. We prayed together every day. And we went to Catholic schools, and we were very involved with helping people in need. So like my sister worked at Catholic Charities and very involved in the pro-life movement. And so often I would come home, I even remember from college, and there'd be a teenage mom with her baby in my bedroom. And they'd be like, "Oh, Mary, come in my bedroom. Somebody's living in your bedroom." So, we kind of had a heart open to the world. And that's where I would really say the source of my missionary vocation came from. Even helping my sister at Catholic Charities, and my mom would run the Christmas family program at the school and helping deliver things. And so, always went to Mass on Sunday, and just a lot of family traditions in that way, kind of raised under the shadow of Our Lady. And my dad was an extremely hard worker. They came from very simple backgrounds, but he wanted to provide for us and make sure that we all went to Catholic schools. And believe it or not, we all the way up to Notre Dame St. Mary's, and then my youngest brother went to Marquette. So he wanted to be different. But my dad was able to sacrifice a ton to do that. He's in his 80s and he's still working. He hasn't had retirement, but it was really, a beautiful family to be raised in. And I remember reading missionary books as a child and longing to go to the foreign missions. I didn't know how that would work. I kind of wanted every vocation. So I thought I'd get married, have this huge family. As a family, we'd work in the missions. Then my husband would die and I would join a religious order, and then I'd go be a hermit. I literally had that all kind of in my head.
Why did you have to die first? Help me understand. No, just kidding.
Isn't that funny? So, but God, he writes straight with crooked lines, because I didn't get married and have a jillion kids, but I have way more spiritual children all over the world than you can imagine, between all of the orphan babies that I took care of, the street kids in Russia and in the Philippines, the homeless kids on the street. And then so then I did that and I came back and I was a hermit. I would live periods of time as a hermit while I was being a missionary, but then I felt called to a really deep vocation that way. And I had 3-year temporary vows as a diocesan hermit under the bishop. And then for a few years after that, I continued to live that way, where it would be, 10 to 15 hours a day in prayer. And I would be in a little, my dad built me in the woods behind his house, a little hermitage, which was 10 by 6 feet. And it was just a huge life-size crucifix that we got from a shutdown church. And I would either sit there alone in the woods and pray or be in adoration. So it was really beautiful. And then kind of the well ran dry, and I didn't have support. I didn't really have support from the church. I didn't really have financial support. And I had a close friend who also had lived as a hermit for a while, a priest, who said, God is very creative. And he said, why don't you live a contemplative life, but then just have a job in the world? Look at your skill set. You speak multiple languages. You went to Notre Dame. You do art, you do music, you love children. Why don't you be a nanny and work for the wealthy? And then you can give that money to the poor. And so I went from living on dirt floors in Africa, very simple life, even as a hermit, and then Michigan Ave, downtown Chicago. And I had triplet newborn babies. But it was very contemplative because it was newborn, and I took from 10 p.m. till noon the next day. So I would just pray all night, and then I'd go home. I'd sleep 7 days a week. It was really intense, but it was contemplative. And I loved in the middle of the night, downtown Chicago, thinking I could be the only person awake right now praying over this city, And then it kind of evolved and it continued. I worked for a lot of families with twins. I did night nannying, day nannying, and I'm just finishing up right now working for a very wealthy family in Chicago. I go in for the weekend and I just run everything and then I come home. So it's very interesting because then simultaneously I start publishing books, and my publisher, Sebastian, asked me to get on social media. So I get on Facebook. I didn't know what. Everyone said, try Facebook. So I tried this Facebook thing, and I didn't have any friends. And I was like, Lord, you have to send me friends. And within 4 days, I had 5,000 friends. And I was like, okay, this guy looks pretty Catholic. Okay, I'll accept. Well, it was all these people from all over the world. And then they started contacting me as persecuted Christians asking for help. And they saw my books and they're asking for my books. So I talked to Sebastian and we talk about trying to fund printing my books in these far away, dangerous places. Pakistan is where we started, Nigeria. And it just started to grow. And these people would contact me and I'd say, how did you find me? And they'd said, well, I Googled help for persecuted Christians and your name came up, but I wasn't helping persecuted Christians at the time. I don't know. They said all of a sudden it led me to you. I think it was God. So I started this new ministry amongst the persecuted Christians, and it got so big that I was always trying to fundraise. And so I had to start a foundation, a non-for-profit, so that donors at least could get tax exemption. So I started the Fiat Foundation, and subsequently have written 8 books. I think it is 8, although you made me doubt.
Sorry about that.
And we do a lot of work. We print on the ground because shipping's too expensive. But in Pakistan, one of my books will be read in front of 200 illiterate women, like my book on the holiness of womanhood. And it's incredible what these books are doing in these countries where women have been abused and all of that. They're being healed. And you have, men insisting that their wives have an abortion because they're pregnant with a girl, and they hand my book to them. And then all of a sudden, they changed their mind. Like, it's just, Muslims are teaching it in their universities. So it's just really incredible. And that's kind of where I sit today. I'm still doing the mission work, but it's from here. So,
well, first and foremost, what a blessing that you are to those countries where Christianity is persecuted the way it is. And that brings us to tonight's topic, which is all about, I guess you could say, fear, but not God-fearing sort of stuff. We're talking about fear of our fellow man as it relates to
human fear, yes,
human fear, right, around religious beliefs. And I love this topic, and I love that we landed on this, because as someone who spent 14 months in Iraq and in the Middle East during the Operation Iraqi Freedom 1 as a soldier, I remember seeing that, and I think I even had a discussion about someone where someone came up to me, and through my interpreter, they started talking to me about Jesus, and they were asking me all sorts of questions, and I could tell that they were really interested in Christianity, but at the time I wasn't. I was not. And it's kind of, and that's what, is even one of the things that inspired the show, and the show Humble Faith in the first place, was a conversation I had with my brother where, unfortunately he is, and I guess you could say, agnostic atheist. And I know this is a topic that you have a deep understanding around. So that's what we'll discuss today. I would like to discuss with our listeners and our viewers the mindset of the atheist. Like, where does it come from? And, what are some of those fears and doubts? And there's two types of people that I'd like to talk about with you. The first being people who want faith, but can't do it. They feel like they can't because maybe the society they're in their family that they live with, whatever. And then there's people who need faith, which, I think we all do, but people who need faith, but totally reject it, like myself back then.
Right.
And, and I remember growing up, and my dad was a scientist. He was an astronomer and an astronomy professor. And, if science can't explain it, is what his thing was, then it didn't exist. And he's passed away now. And I pray to God that he's wrong every day about his beliefs. And I know he was wrong. But let's talk about both of those groups, the people that need faith but reject it, and the people that want faith but feel like they can't have it. So let's start there, because of your extensive missionary background and your time in working in Russia and the Middle East. You said a word earlier. You said systematic atheism. What is systematic atheism? What is that?
So let me say, just to speak to something you just said on fear, I have to tell you that human fear, right? People have human fear of things. I remember that being ejected from my heart when I had to become a missionary in Russia, because I was being formed in Texas by the founder of SALT, Society of Our Lady of the Most Holy Trinity. Okay. It's a religious community. And he said that when you go to mission, you go to live with the people and die with the people. And I was just out of Notre Dame, and I had been to Russia when I was 17 for a summer, and it lit my heart on fire to go back. And he said, when you go, Mary, you're going to die. And it's communism had just been lifted recently before I went. When I was sent, it was to Krasnoyarsk, which was a city of 1 million, 1,000 kilometers from Irkutsk, the middle of Siberia. And I was one of the second American, I think, that was let into the city, because it was a closed nuclear city, which means it was radioactive too. So you had to go knowing that you could get killed, you could get radioactive, everybody got cancer and die. There's all these things. One of the first things when we got there, they sat us down and had us plan our funerals. And I'm 23. What do you want? Do you want us to send your body back to the United States? The diocese was asking this, or should you be buried here? And so when I went, I had to not be afraid. I had to know that I was madly in love with Jesus Christ enough that whatever happened, happened. So we stopped in Rome on our way, and they said, you had one day, you could go to the Sistine Chapel or the catacombs. And I said, I need the catacombs. These people died for their faith. So I went. And when I was in the middle of Russia, I remember being followed by the mafia, followed by, the KGB and, they, all sorts of things. And Jesus showing me these are not big monsters that you fear. These are children of God. They're very naughty children of God, but they are just children of God. And God is above them. And so I walked through this land of really terror, and I could do a whole podcast on just Russia, without fear. And it wasn't naivete. It was a grace to not be afraid. No matter what happened, Catholics were not welcome in Russia. Orthodox were bad enough because they didn't like anybody believing in God. But at least Orthodox had that history in Russia. Catholics were hated. And so I just had to know that, I live for Christ, I die for Christ. And it helped later when I went to Africa and the Muslims were running around trying to light us on fire. And I've had to flee more countries, but I was able to do that because of the formation in Russia. And it's also why I can work with persecuted Christians now. And I am in America, but anything could happen. But to know that my life is in the hands of God. So speaking to people who are afraid to believe in God, I just want to say that you have to go before the Lord, if you can, in the Blessed Sacrament. Some places it's not available, and just ask him to love you and ask him to make you fall madly in love with him. Because when you fall in love with Jesus Christ, perfect love casts out fear, then you're not afraid. So I go into Russia, and yes, there's systematic atheism that's taught. So when Stalin killed way, way, way more Christians than even World War II Nazis. I think the number was 30 million or 35 million. I just looked it up the other day because somebody asked, but it's mind-boggling. Where I worked, it was called the Red Land, and it was not because of red communism, because the land had been covered in the blood of martyrs. And the churches didn't belong to anyone. You go into a church and it's bombed out, or it was taken over and made into a movie theater. It was, destroyed. So this is still in the forefront of these people's minds. And as I'm walking down the street and I'm meeting people, they're very interested because it's funny. I would try to dress like Russians. I'm Slavic looking. So if I didn't open my mouth and they could tell I had a bit of an accent, although my accent tended to be more Polish than American. So that kind of covered me a little bit because I learned Russian with the Polish missionaries. So I made Polish mistakes, and I had studied it at Notre Dame when I was learning Italian. So they say I speak Russian with an Italian accent with Polish mistakes. So, but the people come up, they'd know I was American. And I'd say, how? And they said, your teeth. And I said, what? And they said, only Americans would have teeth like yours. And I was so embarrassed I couldn't cover up my teeth. But they would say, you have to be one of these missionaries, and we want to believe in God, but we can't. And they would cry, and they would say how they're afraid to go to church. And we tried to explain to them that the laws had changed. Communism fell. You're allowed to come. And they wouldn't. They were petrified. And one of the things that communism did was they changed the language of Russian. So they took specific Christian words out of the vocabulary so that people couldn't understand the faith. So we would get Catholics that would come to church every week, and they'd come to our apartment and they'd say, we literally don't understand the Bible. It's not like it was just a foreign concept. They couldn't understand scripture because even the vocabulary had been changed to make people more atheistic, right? Wow. And so they would have to work on these living translations of the Bible and then explanations and things because it was so foreign. And back here in the United States, it's interesting. When I was 16, I needed a hairdresser, somebody to cut my hair. And I found this woman, Olga, in South Bend, who started to cut my hair. And her husband had to flee when communism fell, or he'd be killed. I don't remember. He had like a government job. But she was very smart. She was an engineer and a lawyer in Russia. She couldn't do that here, so she became a hairdresser. But she had 2 children, and I still go see her. So that was like 30 years ago. I'm old. For 30 years, I've been with this woman. She's even still
but you have the energy of a 19-year-old. But
I know.
The energy is amazing.
Like, how old am I? I'm 46 minus 16 is 30. So she said, Mary, you don't understand. I was taught not to believe. I can't believe in God, but I hope my children can. And like, she would ask for the books I write. It's so interesting. And I'm like, no, but you can. Like, we can teach you, and we can, but they like brainwashed the people to think like you cannot believe in God. And I remember a woman really struggling in Achinsk, which was a little outskirt of Krasnoyarsk, and we would go, and I'm still friends with Natasha. But when I met her, she would say, I don't understand why you guys use this word heart. I don't have a heart. I think and I feel. I go to Mass and I hear what the priest speaks at my brain, but I don't have a heart. And it's so incredible because, like, it showed me my work in Russia was more than anything to be the presence of prayer. I was, for the last 6 months, I went to an outskirts of Kansk, the only place the Blessed Sacrament was present from Krasnoyarsk to Irkutsk. So for 1,000 kilometers, it's like, 700 miles, was my apartment. I was the only presence of the Blessed Sacrament. So I would sit there and just pray to the Sacred Heart of Jesus in the Eucharist, hoping that that grace would touch the hearts of the people who would come to my apartment so that we could talk about, like, the human soul. They didn't get that. So there is an atheism that is taught or was in Russia, but there's still a lot of that. I have such a love for the Russian people because it's still there. When they're born, they would be taken away from their mom for a month because they didn't want bonding. When you ride in trains, even in Poland today still, the seat numbers go 1, 7, 28, 4. Why? Because if you bought a ticket with someone, they wanted to make sure you didn't sit by them, because then you'd have a special human relationship. So if you break that off, the human heart isn't there. And so then their brain is taught, basically, your work, you're the opiate of, what you do. Work sets you free is what Auschwitz said, right? I mean, it's the same. Nazism, communism, it's very similar in many ways. Then it's easy to program a brain to believe something if you have no contact with love. But what I saw with these atheists is when they experienced love, they came to know God, because God is love, God is truth, God is beauty. So why did Russia, beautiful Russia, with all of the beautiful folk art, became these ugly, gray, plain buildings just set up in the middle of nowhere, right? Because beauty is an expression of God. And truth is the same. So I would play on the old Russian philosophers. The first Russian class that I had with my Russian tutor, she was teaching me Lermontov, which is a Russian philosopher. So I could talk to these people in their language. And when you teach truth, an atheist can come to know God. There is something taught in the Catholic Church that, like Aristotle and Plato, they were Christians without knowing Christ because they followed perfect truth. And Jesus Christ is truth incarnate, right? God is beauty and truth and goodness and love. So it's interesting because my approach with the trained atheists was to love them, to just love them, to come among. They'd say, why would you leave America where it's so beautiful and everything's perfect and come here? And I would say, because you're being crucified and Christ was stolen from your cross, and suffering without God is hell. I came to suffer with you, just to love and to suffer. I can't fix the horrible sewage problems throughout the city of Krasnoyarsk, right? But I can suffer it with them and show them how to love. They'd say, we never saw somebody so joyful, so happy. It's just God, to be that among them, and then they'd come to believe.
That's powerful. That's a powerful testimony, Mary, and I love that. Corinthians 13 came to my head multiple times. For those of you that is a powerful verse. I mean, what verse isn't powerful, right? But it talks about I feel like you're personifying Corinthians 13. It basically says, no matter what you do, if you do it without love, you're not doing anything.
Nothing, right?
It's powerful.
And people would say the opposite. What are you doing in Russia? Loving. Like nothing. I was praying and loving, because it's like the proto gospel. Like you can't even teach, because these people don't have human formation. They don't know love. I'll tell you a story. So we were warned not to look. I was with a religious sister, and we needed an apartment. And we were going to look for places to live. We were staying with some Claretians at a monastery while we were looking. But the priest had asked a parishioner to find us property, because it's very dangerous. The mafia runs all real estate. And she sold us off to the mob, and he didn't realize it. So she called and said, my husband, which it was not her husband, he was like 20 and she was like 55. And in Russia, the ratio of men to women is such that a 20-year-old man would never be with a 55-year-old woman. So there's like 3 women to every 1 man. So the man gets, his choice. But she's like, my husband will come get you. And so all of a sudden we get a ring at our door, and sister and I look down. There's a big white Mercedes full of these guys. And I was like, sister, that's the mob. And she's like, oh, Mary, you've seen too many mafia movies. And I said, oh, sister, you haven't seen enough. This is the mob. And she's like, well, I'm going. And I thought, I can't let this little naive sister go alone with the mob. So I got to go with her. So we get in this Mercedes, we get in this car together. And they start joking about being brothers and uncles and all this. And she's like, Mary, this is the mafia. And I'm like, I know, but now we're stuck. So just smile and go with it, right? And she's like, we're not going to agree to any apartment until we get home. And I was like, right, just we're looking. So we go. And I'll tell you, halfway through the day, this guy comes up to us, one of them in the car, and he said, a question. How can I get faith? These are really good people. How can I have faith? Do you have to say a prayer to have faith? And I said, well, that would be a good start. Yeah, say a prayer. And he said, does it have to be in Russian? Because I only know one prayer, and it's in German from my grandma. And I said, say a German prayer. And he said, then I'll have faith. And I said, then I'll have faith. Like, how do you explain that to a total atheist mob guy? I'm not kidding you. 2 months later, I saw him in church. Now, he could have been spying on something. I don't know. But he was standing in the back of church. And he became like this kid, around us. Wow. And what was that? The witness of our love, And when the priest found out, he was livid. He's like, what did you sign? You just signed your life away. We're like, no, we didn't sign anything yet. Don't worry. We're not that stupid. But that's an example of being with the atheist mafia, right? But all you do is love, and it breaks that. It can take 5 million drops of water on a hard, rocky heart to break it open. But eventually it cracks. And you never know with these people what number of a drop you are, And so you just have to keep loving and keep loving. And
Mary, are you telling me and the Humble Faith listeners that ultimately, no matter how thick someone's shell is, love can eventually get through to them?
Oh, love always does get it. Love gets it. Reason might not. Love. And I'll tell you this. I learned this from taking in foster babies with my family growing up. My mom would say, they would leave then and they would be adopted. Once or twice they went back to a bad family, but usually this. And people would say, well, isn't that sad? How can you do that? You can, only be with them this much. And my mom would say, we are one link in the rosary of their lives. God took care of them. They are God's children. God brought them to us and God is taking them away from us. We just do our part. Well, in high school, I began working with abused children at a child abuse center, and I worked there for 5 years, and people would say the same thing. And I would always think, it's not about me. They'd say, how can you do that? Doesn't it depress you? And I'm thinking, well, I'm not here for my own, pick me up. I'm here to love. And I can give the love the amount of time I'm there, and then I entrust them to God. Like the triplet nanny, the kids that I took care of, 80 hours a week for a year, and then I don't get to see them, right? I was like their parent, but God took them, and I have to know that he has a plan. The same is for the atheists. I don't care who it is I meet. Right now in Pakistan, we've got Muslims converting. We actually have a problem of too many Muslims wanting to convert and nowhere to hide them. And from encountering my books, and it's not what I wrote. I know it isn't. Anybody could just write those words. It's the love. And it's the prayer of the people for those who receive it. Sometimes I'm an artist and I do icons and they're on the covers of my books. Sometimes it's just the icon that will grab somebody and they'll say, I need that picture. Who is that? And it'll open up their heart and change them. The holiness of womanhood, it's a Catholic teaching of women, is being taught at 3 Islamic colleges right now. Wow. Because women are oppressed and the women like it. And it's converting the men too. So, I would say atheism, Islam, whatever it is, something that hardens a heart in love, because even, a lot of the Muslim men, they're abusive and there's a lot of problems and they're changing because they encounter that love.
This is so awesome, and there's so many things to unpack here. So let me get caught up to, and I love your enthusiasm for love and faith, and it's so powerful. And it's funny in retrospect, hearing these stories from you and about how people are literally. I love the way you put that. You're being robbed of Jesus off of your crucifix, so to speak. That's a very interesting way that you put that. And I think in retrospect, I'm going back to before I kind of was resaved. I was, by the way, I was baptized as a kid, but fell out of touch with faith because, again, it was ingrained in me from my father and my parents at the time, my stepmother and my father, that God didn't exist and why waste time? Right. So it's amazing how. But as a kid, I remember being a believer. My grandmother would take me to church, and then but that went away, but I got it back. Thank the Lord. The Holy Spirit found me, and the love was there for me. So luckily I didn't have that degree of hardening around my heart, as you put it. But during that time before I don't know if it's possibly resaved. What would you call that? But
I don't know. You resaved.
Resaved. All right. So before I was resaved, just talking about faith was totally uncomfortable for me. I was worried I would offend someone, or I was fearful that it would negatively affect my business. And what's crazy is once I was resaved, and I started becoming more vocal, especially on social media, about my faith, I actually lost a client. And I'm not saying it's all because of the faith, but I lost a client to a coaching client to one of the posts I had made, which was very faith-based. And that kind of lends me, and this is certainly not meant to be a political discussion, but
Right.
You made me think of a sermon I had heard during the height of COVID, when things were, really rough, and we were dealing with a lot of riots and social unrest with the pandemic. And the sermon, the priest said, he was like, "This is." He goes, "This you're not." He goes, "We're not experiencing God's wrath right now." He said, "What we're experiencing," he called it the passive wrath of God. He was like, "It's kind of like if you're a kid at a dinner table and you don't want to eat your vegetables, and your parents are like, no problem, you'll come back when you're hungry." He goes, "You'll know if God's like wrathful towards us, because like when he reaches, because he's slow to anger, right? When he reaches the point where it's like floods of biblical proportion, you'll know he's mad. Right now, it's this God's like, hey, if you don't want faith in your schools and your society, no problem. You'll come back when you're hungry." And that spoke to me, and it really hit home, because my kids go to parochial school as well, and it's not that kids that go to public school are evil. I'm not saying that, but there's a difference. My kids want to pray for other people. My kids, right? And I feel like our society is going that way. When you mentioned systemic atheism, I immediately started thinking about well, what are some of the processes in our country that where this could be the future for us if we keep on this path? Do you see?
To be honest,
do you see?
Yeah, I was going to say, the things that used to surprise me about these other countries, we're no better now. Like when I went to Russia the first time when I was 17, and that was back in 1994. So the world has changed since then. I mean, it's not like 64, but 1994, we didn't have any communication. I was like, when I got on the bus to go to Chicago, my family didn't hear from me until the end of the summer. Like there was no communication. And, I would come home with these stories of things going on there. It's completely the way that the world is here. I used to be able to go to the missions, come home, surprise people about the way others live, and then they would help me to go back and to help them. Now, I don't think they'd be surprised. I think it's all the same. I don't think America is any better right now than a lot of these places. Maybe they, they're like in Nigeria with the elections, they'll like go out and like kill people. But like, think of how many babies are murdered in their mother's womb right here. When I was in Russia in 2001 to 2003, there was a young girl there, 15, who was really smart, and she won a scholarship to the United States to study. And her mom said, absolutely not. America is the most dangerous country in the world. They have shootings in schools. There would never be shootings in schools. Now, you might disappear from your apartment, you know what I mean? But you'd never have a shooting in a school. So we definitely have, I would say we definitely are going down the same road. And, but it's not scary to me, because like I've seen it before.
Thoughtless about it, like this, it's fine. Everything's gonna be okay. Like I get that.
It's totally fine, and I'll tell you, like, people, oh my gosh, like people breaking my email, and like what if somebody were to? Nothing could happen to me here that has not happened in other countries. Okay, like in Russia, I had like military people come through my door. I don't know why, because they thought I was American, so I was dangerous, but I wasn't. But like everything was spiked. Like, what do you call it? Like, where they'd listen to you. I can't think of the word.
Spy.
Like spy on, but I forgot. Like, what would they do?
Wiretap.
Wired, yeah. Like my phone was wired. So as soon as you use that landline, you'd hear a click and you'd hear the person. So sister and I would go, today's lesson is in angels.
That's awesome.
But like people, like they watched you everywhere. So when I would go to church, I would be followed by KGB guys, and they'd be with the Orthodox priests, and then they would come out at certain corners and they would corner me, and they would drill me on like the Pope. And I remember going to the bishop's vicar and saying, what am I supposed to say to them? And they said, oh, tell them everything that you know. They know everything that you know. They're seeing your reaction. And so I was like, how am I supposed to know what the Pope's plan is? They're like, well, they don't know how connected you are up to Rome. And I'm like, I'm just a little missionary. But these people would follow me and stuff. Nothing here could really, like, why would I be afraid? Like, if God is for us, who can be against us? Like, what can we do? Like COVID? Oh my gosh. Like, I've taken care of like people dying of AIDS and like, lepers and, like, okay, so like if it's your time to go, it's your time to go. Like,
right.
try to stay in the state of grace.
Like we all, right? What is the verse? To dust we will return, right? I mean, we are.
Yeah. Wow. That all goes back to Father Flanagan, who founded SALT. He formed us so well as missionaries. And he's like, when God created you, he saw the moment of your death. He knows when you're going to die. It's not in your hands. When you're born and when you die is completely not in your hands. So, like, those are two moments that you can hand to him. And yes, you have to be prudent. Like, I wouldn't open the door to the KGB guys, but if they're following, like, he called me to Russia for those 2 years, and I was called to love and to try to be prudent. And then it wasn't safe anymore. So I had to leave. In Nigeria, when the Muslims were lighting people on fire, like, I went to the bishop. I was like, I think I need to leave. So you're prudent, but it reminds me, that song, Be Not Afraid, that they sing in church. You shall cross the barren desert. You shall not die of thirst. You shall wander far in safety, though you do not know your way. Every line of that song I've lived. You'll speak your words in foreign lands and all will understand. If you pass through raging waters in the sea, you will not drown. If you walk amid the burning flames, you will not be harmed. In Nigeria, we would be driving and they'd light the roads on fire. I would have 10-foot flames on either side of the road, and we're driving. Wow. But like, you'd walk within the, and you shall not be, you could stand before the power of hell and death is at your side. Know that I am with you through it all. And I think of like being thrown to the former Satanists. I was thrown into the exorcism ministry. I had to help these people that were steeped in so much evil. And some of them had a foot in the cult and a foot trying to get into the church. And like, could be scary, but I also saw the power of God. And it's like, singing Alleluia would make Satan just screech. So like you saw the power of sacramentals, always having a rosary in your hand, things like that. And then, consecrating yourself to Jesus and Mary, and then you live within them, wow, and your life is in their hands. Yeah. And these atheists you meet, whether it be your brother or a Russian mob guy, their life is in the hands of God too. And our call is to love and to pray and to offer the truth. And at some point, it might be on their deathbed, when they see the face of God, they'll recognize that look of love because they saw it in you, and they'll choose him, because God doesn't send anyone to hell, but they might say, wow, he looks like Sean looked at me once. And it's just giving that familiarity. Okay. I have to tell you about Father Maxime. Father Maxime Popov is a Russian priest, and he was born in a KGB family that was so high up during East Germany. His dad ran East Germany, and he was the only Russian family in East Germany that didn't have rules about where they could go, because the Popovs were so communist they could go anywhere. He was 7 years old and he wandered into a Catholic church, and he saw a statue of Our Lady, and she came out of it, and she told him he'd be a priest. And he walked out of church, and a communist woman saw him and said, the son of Popov in a Catholic church, wait until I tell your father. And he said, I said my first prayer, God, if you exist, do not let my father know I was in a Catholic church. And his dad never found out. And he was 7. So then he was in like 20, maybe. So 13 years later, 15 years later, communism falls, and he meets the Claretian priest that comes to Krasnoyarsk. And he tells him he has to get to the novitiate in Poland. And he gets on a train in Siberia, and he hides in the bathrooms. It's like a 5-day train ride to Moscow. And every time the conductor came, he would go from bathroom to bathroom. And then he switched the train in Moscow, and he got over to Poland, and he walked on foot to the novitiate. Maxim Popov, the son of the head of the KGB in East Germany. So, I talked to him a few weeks ago. He's still a priest. So God can do anything. What we're called to do is to give that atmosphere of love and prayer. When I went to Russia in 1994, I walked through a park and I had a miraculous medal, and there was a babushka sitting there, and I walked up and handed it to her, and she started weeping and crying and fell on her knees in front of me and was saying names and pointing at my hand, and I thought, she wants more for her family, so I gave more. I couldn't believe the reaction to a medal. But then I thought, of course, for how many years since 1917, when Our Lady appeared in Fatima at the same time that communism came, right? She asked for prayers for the conversion of Russia. So from 1917 till 1994, people were praying for the conversion of Russia. When I was little, we were taught, pray for the conversion of Russia. So when I walked through Russia, the air was full of gasoline of grace. All you needed was a little spark, and it would just explode. So sometimes you go and you can go head to head with someone and explain. There is proof of the existence of God and stuff. You can do that. Or you can pray for them and you can love them. And eventually God will find whoever needs to come and be that spark. Yeah. But you have to make sure they have that atmosphere.
You know what? I love what you said here, because it's easy to become combative, right? It's easy to want to win, and I'm going to convince them. And you're right. You're using logic, and you're not coming from a place of love. But that's such a great point and a phenomenal reminder. So for those of you who are believers out there, and you have loved ones that are, atheist or whatever, ultimate or agnostic, I don't even know what all those terms even mean, other than they're not believers, right? Bottom line is this: enough love, and you never give up. You just keep tripping,
right?
And it won't, and pray for them, and then they won't be able to stop. Their heart will convert. And you know what this is? And I want to take this. I do want to spend a few minutes discussing those who need faith, choosing to reject it. But before we do, I want to fast forward to something that, your fearlessness is so commendable. And, there's so much in the Bible that talks about that. And, I think, everything from when Peter was walking on water and Jesus was like, just keep your eyes on me and stay with me and you won't sink. And then he stopped and then he started to sink. Right. And then, but I want to go all the way to Revelation, because what you're speaking of here is, correct me if I'm wrong, you've done years of meditation. And by the way, I still think you're just in meeting you tonight, you're such a people person. I don't want you to go back.
You know what it is though? It's love. I'm actually 100% introvert if you do the test, but I love people so much that when the Holy Spirit comes, it's the love that makes me connect, but then I go and I'm like, I could use 3 weeks of silence.
Well, I appreciate you opening up and sharing your love with all of our listeners, Mary. So that being said, Revelation, right? It speaks, correct me if I'm wrong about any of this, because again, I'm not the expert here, but that's why I'm interviewing people like you. But Revelation, how does it speak of, the future when Jesus does return, and essentially people will have a choice, and from what I understand, the people who choose Jesus are essentially martyring themselves, similar to what Jesus did. So they're literally choosing eternal life with God over their mortal life now. And so that, to me, that's the ultimate test. I feel like you would pass that hands down, you already have. It's
not a test in the future. It's a test now. We are called, you, today, tonight, to have a martyr's heart. We're all called to have a martyr's heart. What does that mean? To love Christ more than anything, and to be willing to die. So if somebody shows up at your door and says, do you love Christ? You say, yes, you get shot, you die. You have to be willing to die for your faith. And then you live that way, whether it be loving Christ enough to lose a client, loving Christ enough to lose a relationship, to lose a job, to be mocked, to lose a family member who you really love. Maybe a friendship goes sour because you put Christ first and they don't understand it. It doesn't mean that you argue with them and turn them away, but sometimes people they're intimidated by your mad love of God, right? But you have to live with that martyr's heart. Go.
When you have that martyr's heart, how does that affect your the amount of fear and the amount of fear you feel about anything in general?
I'll tell you though, perfect love casts out fear. People always say, you're so courageous. I'm not courageous. I'm scared to death of the same thing. Like, if you're going to kill me, do it fast, because I don't really want, some of these saints of old, they got lit on fire, then they got slit, then they got thrown to the lions. No, please, just poison me. But why am I not afraid? Because I know that God is all love. And God is all powerful. And anything that he allows, he can do something great through. And I've seen him protect me in so many ways where the entire world came against me and they were evil in what they were doing. And God protected me. So why would I be afraid of anything if he's with us? Courage, I don't have courage, like a man might go out with courage or excitement almost. A woman her courage is usually trust. A woman who's afraid is courageous if her husband goes to the door. Or if usually they're not women have a tendency to not go out and fight that battle, right? But when you have that kind of trust in God, it's because of that love relationship I have with the man, Jesus Christ, who I know. And how do I know him? Because I've spent years with him in prayer. And it's not I'll sit 5 hours in adoration and he'll appear and talk to me for 5 hours. That doesn't happen. You go and it's dark and it's boring and you don't feel any, answers, but you stay because you are exercising your faith that you believe and you hope and you love. And when you walk out of that church, you're different. It's something that God does to your heart. It's not your mind and it's not your emotions. You can look at Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane. Father, if it can be your will, take this cup. He's shaking. He's dark. He's afraid. And yet he does the Father's will because the love within him drives him on, But you wanted to talk about, too, those who've rejected the faith, right?
Yes. The ones that need it but are rejecting it. Tell me a little bit,
they're usually wounded.
Okay, how do you mean when you say wounded?
Well, they're usually wounded and they haven't experienced the love of God. Maybe they've been hurt by a person in their family. Maybe they've been hurt by broken, relationships or somebody in the church did something, Maybe they were taught as a child that the faith wasn't real, and that then there's this underlining thing. If I believe, then am I going to get rejected by my dad who didn't, there's always something. Maybe you were taught something erroneous and you're afraid to believe it, or you're too selfish to believe it. And if you believe it, then you have to change, right? I see a lot of people leave the faith just because they're so self-absorbed and they really would rather sleep or go to yoga or go get Botox on Sunday morning, then go be with their creator. They don't know Jesus and they don't know his love, because if they did, they would love him back. And so it's their own selfishness that rejects it, or a laziness, or a woundedness. Maybe they've done something so bad that they don't believe the love of God could exist for them.
They don't
and it does.
He forgives us. Yeah, that he forgives no matter.
Right. But it's could you really talk to me and not know that I have a genuine affinity for you and I want the good of you, right? Somebody can look at me and see that. So they can't see God, but it's important to go to those people and show that. I have nieces and nephews. Thank God none of my siblings have left the faith, but I have nieces and nephews who've left the faith. And it's bizarre. They were raised solid, daily mass, all of this. Why? One might have screwed up so much that they're afraid to go back. Another might be lazy. Another, might choose something else. But their parents, my siblings, get amazed at my reaction to them because I'm so extreme. But I'm the aunt that they show up at my dinner table and they're like, why? Like they left the church because I love them. And I don't preach to them I don't even act like I know they left the church. I know they don't go to church outside. I don't tell them that, right? But I do talk, of course, about the new rosary I got them on my last pilgrimage. And I speak to their heart. And if they have a baby, I buy them a gift. And I ask them about their job that I really could care less about. Because when you show that face of love, then they're like, oh, maybe the church isn't so bad, maybe Aunt Mary's not so crazy, she can make a mean cup of coffee and she's got some good wine at her house. So when you can love people and put God in what's normal for them, instead of being like this preachy person who knows more, instead you meet them where they are. Some of them are artists. They're bad, they're evil looking art. I say nothing. They're beautiful art. I compliment because I'm also an artist, Another might play piano. So I ask them to come over and play my piano. It's, that's the way to get people back to the faith. And then it comes up, because in today's world, if you come on too frontward, it just drives people, You have to show them that it's not just preaching, but it's love.
Mary, when I speak, one of my presentations I do public speaking for, I ask the biggest person in the room to come up to the front. And then I ask them to raise their hands and then I just start pushing on them and guess what they do immediately?
They step back.
No,
they push back.
They start pushing
right.
back. So it's crazy how it's just our natural inclination. Whenever someone pushes against us, we push back. But you don't have to. If I just one gesture and they were walking with me, and I don't have to. There's no fight anymore. And I that's where I used to be. I'm still in sales, I guess, as a business owner. But back in the day, I used to sell cars, and now here I am doing a faith-based show. How funny is that?
Right.
But not that car salespeople are evil.
You're selling the faith.
Well, but here's the thing. I used to come at everything by trying to convince people of stuff. But once I learned to coach, I learned the power of questions. And, it's funny. And then eventually, by studying the Bible, I realized who the first coach was. I think the first coach was Jesus. He asks way more questions in the Bible than he actually gives statements. And I feel like that's one of the best ways. It's you're right. They're wounded, but where does that wound come from? And why does it exist? And how does it affect their faith? And if we can understand that, then we can pinpoint their challenge and then, address it. It's now you're throwing a dart without a blindfold on. Whereas if you try to push, I feel that's what I encourage. That's what I'm going to use my God-given coaching talents to ask my brother some deep questions and try to deeper understand where that wound is coming from, because maybe then I'll be able to, use a targeted approach to helping him see it, a different perspective. And I love everything you've shared tonight, Mary. You are a true blessing. And by the way, who you are personifies. There's a Bible verse I saw earlier this week, and I truly believe you personify this verse.
I hope it's good. It's not
verse is bad.
Get behind me, Satan. I don't know.
Hopefully if you get offended, you can tell us. It's okay.
I won't be.
Timothy 4:7-8. So exercise yourself towards godliness, for bodily exercise profits a little, but godliness is profitable for all things, having promise of the life that now is and of that which is to come. You truly exercise your faith in everything you do. You have your discipline around your faith and around following God and leading others to God. It's it's beautiful. I mean,
Thank you.
I'm blessed to have had this opportunity to interview you today before you go back to being a hermit in the future.
No, sort of. I'm writing a doctoral dissertation.
Mary, I look forward to reading that and your books. Also, share, please, if you would share, where can the Humble Faith listeners pick up some copies of your books?
Well, they're all available on Amazon. If you just put my name in, they'll all come up. And in Route Media and Books, I mean, Sebastian has his website there too. Also, you can go to marykloskafiat.com. And my nephew gave me the idea to put everything in one spot, but I do all of that myself. And I am not even sure if I put my 8th book up there. I need to update my website. But if you go, there's a section on books and you can find them. And you can, when you click on it, it'll link you back to where you can buy it. We were having glitches. Somebody got in and erased all my links, but I think I fixed them. So,
don't worry, I will.
You get spiritual warfare everywhere. I'm just telling you. But if you put in Mary Kloska in Amazon under books, all of them should come up, and they're in multiple languages. They're in Spanish and Polish and Russian, and then the African and the Pakistani, Afghani languages, Amazon won't print. So Mary, you have to go there to get it.
What are the odds the KGB has listened to our entire conversation?
I have no idea, but I really don't care. One day on my computer, it popped up and it said, "You are being spied on from Russia." And I was like, is that news?
Everyone, this has been another episode of Humble Faith, where ordinary people can express and share their fears, concerns, and challenges with their faith. And Mary, you've been an amazing guest. God bless you. You have a great evening. And God bless you, listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you. God bless you. Bye-bye.